Today is the 22nd of March, 2020. We are few in number, but we are here. Today we begin video recording of the sermons, and I will be putting it online later today for those of you who cannot be here, as well as audio recording. I'm going to be continuing my series in Genesis. Jolene and I had a long discussion about where we would go with the sermons, and I'm going to handle a passage that I had originally intended not to discuss in favor of something else. Today we're in chapter 9, the last part of the chapter 9 of the book of Genesis. And I've titled it The Mocker for reasons that you'll see as we go along. So I'm going to be reading the passage, Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 through 28. Turn with me in your Bibles to that passage. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders, and they walked in backwards and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend the territory of Japheth. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Altogether, Noah lived 950 years, and then he died. Life after the flood. The Bible tells us that all of humankind descended from the three sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Noah himself had no more children for reasons that are not recorded. And you have to contrast this section in chapter 9 with some other genealogies, for example, in Genesis 11. In Genesis 11, it says over and over and over down through the generations, and he had other sons and daughters, and he had other sons and daughters. He had other sons and daughters. But Noah did not have any other sons and daughters, and the Bible does not give us any hint why. Some people have come up with some very imaginative explanations why, but there is nothing in the text that explains this. Noah had been born a farmer. In fact, the name that his parents gave him was about farming. They were tired of working the ground and they wanted a son to work it for them, so they named him Noah. You can see that in Genesis chapter 5, verse 29. And after the flood, after preserving his people, after building the ark, after the whole year plus in the ark, when things finally settled down and the crisis was over, Noah went back to farming. And you know what? We are in a crisis, and someday this crisis will pass, and we will go back to the work that we have, the normal life that we have. John will continue to be cutting weeds in the parks. Other people will be continuing with their jobs. There are many, many people in our country right now who are not working. And it's not because they don't want to work, it's because their business has been shut down. But this will eventually pass. I want to give you that hope. And when it does, people will go back to work. It tells us that as part of his farming operations, Noah planted a vineyard. He planted grapes. Now, it's possible to translate the Hebrew he was the very first one to plant grapes. But the best translation is that he proceeded in his farming efforts to plant grapes. I don't believe that grapes were unknown to mankind before Noah planted his vineyard. And that has significance a little later on. Well, do you know what farming people do at the end of the harvest? They have parties. Even in the United States, you hear about barn parties at the end of the harvest season. Our own church in Hayden, Idaho, we used to have a hayride in the fall at the end of the harvest season, and then we'd have a chili feed after that. Well, in a lot of parties, they serve wine. And Noah apparently had a whole lot of new wine from a bumper crop. And he celebrated a little bit too much. When I read this, I got curious thinking about this, because I didn't know these answers, but I wondered, how much wine does it take to pass out anyway? I'm not a drinker, so I don't have any direct experience, but I looked it up. A website called AmericanAddictionCenters.org, they have some information about what happens when you drink. And it turns out if you drink 10 drinks of wine, each which is 5 ounces, or about 50 ounces total, or just a little over 6 cups, it will make you pass out, especially if you're not used to drinking. Noah probably had not been drinking for the whole year on the ark, at least. And he had probably not been drinking before his first grape crop, so he had not been drinking for a long time. So it might have been as little as 6 cups, or a quart and a half. That's not very much. I hate to admit this, but I can drink a quart or even more of orange juice at one sitting on a hot summer day. It's not that hard to drink that much. So we don't know how much he really had, but it actually doesn't take as much as you would imagine. German new wine has as much as 11% alcohol. New wine is not necessarily weak wine. It can be pretty strong. The Bible has some things to say about wine specifically. And these are from the book of Proverbs. There are other places where we don't hear about wine, but I've chosen these two particular because I think they're especially pertinent. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise. And then this one, this is so pertinent a picture to my mind. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Proverbs 23. I think that's verses 11 and 12, not 31 and 12. So, wine is a mocker. I have to ask the question, why did Noah get drunk? Well, like as I alluded to earlier, in any agricultural society, it's customary to have a celebration or a feast after the harvest. And that's probably what happened here. And people often drink too much at parties. Have you ever noticed that? At a company party, the people you're with, they start drinking too much. Well, the text doesn't explain exactly what happened to Noah. And some other things that people have wondered down through the years. Did fermentation only happen after the flood? In other words, Noah was totally surprised that this wine had a kick to it. Well, I think that's unlikely. I don't know, I wasn't there, but it seems unlikely to me. And the other question is, well, was Noah the first human being ever to press grapes? Well, that seems a little unlikely as well. Why would he have planted these plants if he wasn't going to make juice out of them? I think the simplest explanation is this, that Noah just had too much at his own party. My father has a saying, well, no, my father has another saying, that'll come later. But it goes something like this. Anybody at a party can exercise bad judgment. And it starts out like this. You have a drink. And then the drink has a drink. And then that calls for drinks all around. And then next thing you know, you're passed out in your tent. After departing, probably the next day, early in the morning, Noah was still sleeping it off in his tent. And his youngest son, Ham, came into the tent, probably to figure out where Dad was, because Dad doesn't normally sleep in. He went into the tent to rouse Dad, and he saw that his father was laying there naked. Probably he got hot in the night from the effect of the alcohol and tore off his clothes without even knowing it, and there he is, passed out naked in his tent. Ham goes in and says, "Whoa, look at Dad." Then he goes out and tells his brothers. He probably makes a joke of it. He's probably mocking his father who's passed out. Well, this was the very height of disrespect. Even though Noah wasn't very respectable at the time, his son still owed him respect as his father. By contrast, Noah's older sons came in and covered him up. They got a sheet or a blanket or a robe or something, and they held it up, and they walked in backwards and dropped it over him so that he was covered up. That was the respectful thing to do. When Noah finally woke up, there was a reckoning. He realized what had happened to him. And he passed out some punishment. And for reasons that are not clear to me, and I can't find anything in any of the commentaries that would suggest why this was the case, Noah cursed Ham's son rather than Ham himself. And this curse actually became part of the patriarchal blessing. There are other patriarchal blessings in the book of Genesis, one from Isaac to Jacob, and another one from Jacob to his sons. And this is a tradition among Eastern peoples to pass down the blessing from one generation to the next. And Noah has woven his curse on Ham into a blessing on his other two sons, all in one package. The first and the main blessing was for Shem. Shem was probably not the oldest. If you read all the text and put all the pieces together, Japheth is the oldest, Shem is the middle son, and Ham is the youngest son. In other places through the Bible, the oldest son is supposed to receive the blessing. And then, in fact, the two examples I gave earlier for Isaac and his sons and Jacob and his sons, it was actually not the oldest son that received the blessing, because of either deception or the oldest son had done something wrong. But Shem seems to be the one who is the truest follower of Yahweh, the truest follower of our God. He is the one through whom the Messiah will come, through Shem's line. Japheth received the second blessing. And interestingly enough, his fortunes are tied to the blessings of Shem. And Canaan, Ham's third son, youngest son, was cursed to be a slave to both Shem and Japheth. And in many ways, this curse was fulfilled through the Canaanites. The Canaanites and the Hebrews were enemies practically their entire existence in the land of Canaan. The Canaanites never became a great nation like any of the other lineages. They always were there in the land, and they were always troublesome, but they were never an empire. They were never a great nation. They were always under somebody's thumb. Egypt, or Israel, or the Phoenicians, or somebody. Now, I want to address something very important here. This curse on Shem has been misused many, many times down through the years. And it works something like this. When you read the genealogies, you hear that one of Shem's sons settled in Egypt. Well, Egypt is in Africa. So that means that anybody in Africa is a descendant of Ham, and therefore cursed. And therefore we can make slaves of them. And sadly enough, Christians, Jews, and Muslims have all used this same excuse for making slaves of black Africans. They're cursed by Ham. They're supposed to be our slaves. Well, first of all, we don't know where the black Africans come from because they don't fit the genealogies very well. We know that the original Egyptians were descendants of Ham, but you can't say that with any authority for somebody in West Africa, where most of the slaves came from. And then Darwin came along and wrote a book called The Origin of Species, which, if you read the whole full name, talks about the superior races. And he painted a layer of science on top of this horrible idea that the people in Africa were blessed, or were cursed, I mean. Darwin said, well, they're not cursed, but they're less evolved than we are, so therefore it's okay to make slaves of them. It's really tragic how we take the same idea and misapply it to another race for completely different reasons, but it has the same outcome. So what does this mean for us? I want to look at Ham's sin first. Ham's sin was mocking or making light of his father's failure. Now, I'll get to Noah in a little bit, but Ham did not treat his father properly when his father was at his most vulnerable, when his father honestly had failed. And we are so like that. Has anybody here ever raised chickens? Do you have one chicken in the flock that is pecked by all the others sometimes? We didn't in our flock, but our neighbors next door did. And when they moved away, we tried to adopt this one last pecked chicken, but she died on us because she was, our flock didn't like her either. And crows do the same thing. If there's a weak crow in the flock, all the rest of the crows will start attacking it, mobbing it, it's called. We're just like that. When one of us fails, and I'm talking about moral failure, I'm not talking about accidents, we want to jump on them and kick them rather than try to restore them. The Bible tells us if a brother fails, bring him back, restore him. Don't kick him. But this is what Ham was actually doing to his father. His father had failed and Ham was making fun of it. It made Ham feel better to see his father degraded. That was Ham's sin. When we kick those who are down, who have fallen, we're actually attacking God, believe it or not. Because this person who has fallen is made in the image of God. In Proverbs, it tells something, not exactly the same situation, but very similar. Do not gloat when your enemy falls. When they stumble, do not let your heart rejoice. For the Lord will see and disapprove, and then take his wrath away from them. God doesn't like it when we gloat on people who have failed. Not when they're enemies, not when they're our parents. Well, Noah's failure was drinking too much. It put him into a very compromised position, as it does almost anybody who drinks too much. My father told me this long ago. If you never take the first drink, you don't have to worry about the second. Now, it's not to say that drinking is forbidden or necessarily even bad, but for many of us, it is a snare that we don't need to fight. And if you never start, you'll never have to worry about it at the end.